So good morning, everybody, and happy new week to all our classes joining us. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And November has been an epic month for us. The entire month has been made possible by our friends at the Gardner Foundation. They support amazing biomedical and health research. We've done a bunch of programs with them. We've got one happening tomorrow that should be really exciting. So a huge thanks to them for making this really exciting 50-plus program month possible for us. Now, today we are bringing back one of our favorite speakers of last year, and that is Tobias Hauser. So he gets to do some really cool stuff. He's joining us today in London, where he serves as the head of the Developmental Computational Psychiatry Group, where he gets to work on understanding our brains, the most complicated thing in the universe. Never mind stars, never mind animals, never mind all these things. The human brain is a marvel of engineering, a marvel of so many amazing things. And so when we typically think of studying these, we think of fancy machines, maybe like an MRI machine. We think of big labs and hospitals, all sorts of cool stuff. And that's some really cool stuff. We're going to learn a little bit about that today. But there is another way to study our brains, and that is with something that all of us have in our pockets, a smartphone. So we're going to learn a little bit about how you go about doing that, why that's so important, and what they are learning. So without further ado, Tobias, thank you so much for joining us today, and take us away.
All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Jesse, for the very kind introduction. I'm very excited to be back. It's been a long time since I was on the show last time. I'm very excited that so many of you have joined in to learn more about this mysterious thing which we call the brain. And in the next couple of minutes, I'll tell you about what I'm doing for my work and how we are doing that and new ways we're going to try to understand how the brain works. So let's get started right away. So this is me. If you don't see me in the camera, this is how I look on a handsome picture. And I am talking to you from somewhere else in the world. I am based in London in the United Kingdom, good old England. And that's obviously the city of double-decker buses and the Big Ben, but also the University College London. That's where I am based. And I am really interested in one thing, which is the thing that is above your eyes, behind your forehead. And obviously you know what it is. It's the brain. And today we're going to explore about the brain, and we're going to learn a bit about what this brain is. And in the next couple of minutes, I will tell you more about the brain. So what the brain is and what it does. I'll tell you how we can study the brain. So what do we actually do to understand how the brain works, and what kind of methods do we use? And then we'll look at something that you might be very particularly interested in, which is, how does the brain grow up? Are we born with a perfectly made big brain, or is that also changing as we are growing up? We'll find out. All right. So, but first of all, I'll ask the question: why am I interested in the brain, and also why should we all be interested in the brain? And I think the brain is the most amazing thing that there is in the world. We heard it from Jesse from the introduction, but I think the brain is really the thing that makes us unique, that makes us humans, and that actually allows us to understand what we are doing. So the brain is really relevant for everything we do. So, for example, if you're sitting now in your classroom and you can see on the screen my slides and maybe me talking, all this information is processed by the brain. So what happens is that something goes through your eyes and then it ends up in the brain, and only through the brain you will actually understand that this is a PowerPoint presentation and there is a guy talking somewhere in the ether. But the brain is not only there for constructing what we call visual scenes. So making sense of what we see. The same is true for everything that we feel, that we hear, but also it is responsible for our emotions, our feelings. So if you feel happy, or if you feel sad, or if you feel slightly annoyed or excited, all of that is happening in your brain. And even though some of these feelings might feel more that they're related to your gut or your heart, it's actually all being generated in your brain. So the brain not only makes sense out of the world, it also makes sense out of your feelings, and makes your feelings make you feel happy or not. The brain is obviously also important for our thoughts. So it allows us to think about things, to understand what I am talking about, but also maybe to daydream or to solve your homework. Everything that we are thinking is happening in the brain as well. And last but certainly not least, the brain is also responsible for us moving. So, what we call actions, everything from fidgeting around on your chair to running around playing football or soccer, or even playing your game console back at home. So, the brain is marvelous because in literally everything we do as humans, it is involved and it has very much importance to it. Now, what is that? This thing which kind of is responsible for literally everything we do and think. Well, it is an organ. That means it is a part of our body, like many other things that we have in the body. And you can guess, probably, if I were to ask you, would have lots of different organs you could tell me, such as the heart or the lungs. And the brain is just yet another of these organs. And obviously, it is sitting here within the head. And the brain is actually something which is fairly common. Almost all animals do have a brain. So humans do have a brain, but many other animals do have as well. So for example, even like very, very small animals like fruit flies, the ones that are flying around if you let your bananas lie around for too long. Even those tiny little creatures, they do have a brain, and it's an amazing brain. Many of the researchers actually study the fly brain because it is so beautifully constructed and so well to understand. But not only things that fly around have brains, also things that swim in water have a brain. Namely, for example, different fishes. This is a very small fish, the zebrafish. And these zebrafish also do have brains. A very interesting one, and bird scientists also studied it. And obviously, other mammalians also have brains. So, for example, the mouse or the rat, they also have brains. They're not really big brains, I have to say. They're probably like as the size of the tip of my pinky finger. So, not too big, but relative to the whole creature, it's still fairly decent. And not only small animals have brain, also the biggest animals have brain. So, for example, the whales have massive brain. So they're not only big animals, they also have big brains. In fact, they have the biggest brains of the entire world. So, if we were to look at how big a human brain is compared to a whale brain, you see down here on the right hand side button. On the left hand side, you see the whale brain. It's gigantic. And on the right side is the human brain. So actually, we have a much smaller brain. But importantly, our brain is relative to how big we are, it's still the biggest. So you can see that the whale brain is slightly bigger than the human brain here in Homo sapiens. And if you compare it to, let's say, the goldfish, you see we have quite a big brain. All right, so other brain facts to understand a bit more about what the brain is and what it does. It is not very heavy. It's not particularly big. It is only 1.2 to 1.5 kilograms. So this is kind of a cabbage or something like that. Not very heavy. And if you were to look at the brain, and touch it, it would feel a bit like a ripe avocado. So it is somewhat glibbery, but fairly consistent. And what is it consistent of? What does it exist of? Well, interestingly, like our human body, almost most of it is water. So 3/4 of the human brain is actually just liquid, just water. But it's important what is embedded in this brain. What is it that holds this water together? And these are the brain cells. And these brain cells, there are many and many of them. There are in total 86 billion brain cells. That is a gigantic number. Very difficult to imagine how much this is. 86 billion cells. This is 10 times the number of people that are currently living on planet Earth. So it's a gigantic number of these brain cells that are squished together on this very small space within the brain. Now, how does the brain look like? Well, we see lots of drawings, right? And so this, what you actually see here, is actually a brain scan of a real brain. And you can see here on what is shown on top, this is the front, and on the left-hand side, we have the left-hand side, and on the bottom, this is the back of the brain. And what you can see is this is a fairly funny structure, right? It has lots of wrinkles and stuff, but it also has different colors. And we differentiate these different colors. The areas that are here more gray, mostly on the outside, as you see, we are calling that the gray matter. For obvious reasons, it looks gray. And that's where all these brain cells, these nerve cells, which we call neurons, they are sitting all in this gray matter. And they are really, really important because they are processing information. They are taking the information that is coming in, such as the things that come through your eyes, and they make sense out of it. They make sense out that there's a human sitting and that you're currently seeing a brain. And the other thing that is in our brain is what we call the white matter. Obviously, it looks white. Why wouldn't we call it white matter? And the white matter is important because it is the wiring and the insulation of the brain. So all these nerve cells that are sitting on the gray matter, they are connected to each other. And these wires, that's all in the white matter. And these wires have lots of insulation, which allows them to work well, similar to your wires at home, the cables you have. They also have insulation, otherwise it wouldn't work that well. All right, so this is amazing, right? This very complex, very amazing thing that does stuff. But how can we actually study it? Well, we can't just cut people's heads open and poke needles to understand what is going on, right? Especially if we're interested in how the brain develops. We can't just look at young people's brain. We can't open their skulls. That's not very ethical. So what we do instead is we use big machines. We call them magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, or simply we just talk about scanners. And an MRI or a scanner, you might actually know from the hospital. So if you've ever broken your leg or anything else, if you ever had an investigation in the hospital, then maybe you were asked to lie in a scanner. And with this scanner, we can make pictures, not only of your body, but also of your brain. And that's what we do. So we put people into these big, big scanners, and we can understand what is going on in the brain. And by using these scanners, what we actually do is, what a scanner is essentially just a gigantic magnet. So you can think of it just as a gigantic magnet that allows us to make pictures and use the magnetic properties of our brains to make a picture out of it. It is a fairly complex measure and is fairly complex to understand what exactly is going on. So you just need to trust me on that if we put people into scanners, we actually are able to get these beautiful pictures out of it. So what can we get when we use these MRI scanners? What kind of information do we get out of these scans? So on the one hand, we can understand the anatomy or the brain structure. So what I showed you before, this gray and white matter, we can see how is it built, what are the properties, and how does it, for example, change as we grow up? Does it grow? Does it shrink? Does it change its shape? And so on and so forth. But the other thing, which is very cool, is we can also observe people whilst they're thinking, and we can understand which brain areas are are relevant for making us think. So we call that the brain function. And what we can do is we can, for example, give people a treat in the scanner. We can give them some money, or we can give them some nice chocolate, for example, and we can look which brain areas are lighting up when you get a nice chocolate. And we see that there are specific areas in the brain which really, really, really care for nice chocolate or a good reward. We can also look at, well, what is the brain doing when it has to work, when it has to solve difficult equations or kind of run really hard and work really hard and put effort into something. And we see that there is a specific dedicated different brain region which is relevant for that as well. So really we can tease apart which brain areas are relevant for processing certain information, for doing things when we think and experience different events. And so by using these measures, we've by now understood many areas of the brain and what they're doing. And we call them different lobes or different brain parts. And for example, there is one brain part here in the back, so at the back of your head, which we call the occipital cortex. And this is relevant for seeing. So everything that goes through your eyes goes straight to the back of your head and make the back of your head make sense of what it is seeing. Then we have what we call the parietal cortex. That's more here on top. And this is really important if you are reading stuff, or if you're solving math, or if you are thinking about where things are located. Then we have here the temporal cortex, and this is really important for memory. So everything you remember is involving this part of the brain. But also if you are walking around in town, then, or using even a map, that's where the temporal cortex really comes into play. And it's also really important if for language, for understanding what I'm saying, or for saying different words and linking them to the meaning. But the last part, this huge green lump here, this is the most exciting part, I think, because humans are pretty unique in that. You can see how big this thing is. It's much bigger than the other parts, and it's only in humans this is particularly big. So humans have much more of this frontal part, and we call it the prefrontal cortex. And that is really important for everything we do, which we think makes us human. So like thinking about things, making decisions, planning ahead, thinking about, well, what will you do after this lecture? What will you have for dinner tonight? Where will you go? What will you do on Christmas? Or thinking back what you did just last week on Thanksgiving. That's the prefrontal cortex. And this is really interesting because humans are quite unique in their prefrontal cortex. We have a much bigger one than any other animal. Now, we are interested in understanding how this brain develops because, well, the human body develops a lot, right? Between we are born and until we are 18 years old, we grow massively, we become much bigger. So what is happening to the brain? And so what we are doing is we are looking, how do these brain structures change over development from childhood to adolescence to adulthood? And one thing which is really, really important and impressive is that when we are born, the brain is 4 times smaller than when it's grown up. So it grows over 4 times bigger throughout development. That is massive. So how does that work? So we also know that the brain develops at different brain areas develop at different times. So for example, this prefrontal cortex that I was just talking about, that is the one that ripens the latest. So this takes the longest to really fully mature, and that's why it takes so long to become an adult. And the problem, however, if we want to understand this, is, well, traditionally we put people into scanners. So we take small children, put them in the scanner, we take adolescents, put them in the scanner, we take adults in the scanner. But the problem with using these scanners is they are really, really expensive. So these are hospital machines, they are very big, they need a lot of energy, so they really take a lot of energy and cost us a lot. And it takes a lot of time to study people. They need to come into the scanner, and we need to spend a lot of money, and it's really expensive. And that's why we often only look at very small groups. But what we really would want to understand is, like, how does that work on the large scale? How does every one of us develop? And so we were thinking, well, rather than have everyone come to our lab and line to these scanners, can't we just find something out that everyone can do at home? So how about, like, can't we put a scanner into our smartphone? Everyone has a smartphone at home, right? And wouldn't it be brilliant to study the brain using these smartphones? So first we thought, well, can we just take these big scanners and make them smaller and put them into the smartphone? But obviously, because they are such a strong and big magnet, we realized that it's not really feasible. We can't do that. So unfortunately, we had to stop this idea. But we came up with another idea, which is, I was telling you about where we can look at how people are thinking when they get a reward, for example, when they get some chocolate. Well, we can do that, right? We can give people some points and make them win or make them lose or put effort into their work. And we can do that on the smartphone. And that's exactly what we did. And we developed the Brain Explorer app, which is a fantastic app here on your smartphone. So this is how it looks. We have developed lots of different very cool games which everyone can download. It's on your phone, on your Play Store, on no matter whether it's Android or Apple. We've developed a bunch of different tasks, and it's really cool because you can play all these different games. You can play with pirates to earn milk. You can send out robots to discover different treasures, and you can scan old spaceships to understand and get them to sell the best spaceships. And what we've done is we have taken these games that we use in the scanners and we've put them into the smartphone app. And by doing that, we can understand how the brain grows. So what is it? What is there? Well, as I said, we have now 7 different, very fun and entertaining games which look at different aspects of brain function. And we have some questionnaires which ask you about mood and feelings, and people can tell you how they feel. And by playing these games, you can actually learn and earn something. So if you play well, you can earn medals. You can get moons and stars, and the better you play, the more of these you get. And you get feedback of how well you're doing, and you compare it to your classmates. You can see who is playing better than the other, and maybe play it again, and maybe you improve. And this allows us, all of the data allows us to understand how the brain develops. Because when you are playing the games, you not only play the games, but you also help us understand and do research. And we can then analyze the data and understand how the brain, and especially this prefrontal cortex, is developing. And we have lots of people that already play this game, over 10,000 people all over the world. And you see there are several thousand people here in the US not only here in London and the UK, but also quite a lot of people in the US and Canada who are already playing our games very successfully. And everyone can take part. So this is completely anonymous, so we don't know who you are. We can't link it back to you if you play, but we still get the game data that you have, and we will use that to understand the brain. And so if you're interested, how can you do it? Well, it's very simple. You can either scan this QR code or you can go to the brainexplorer.net website, or you go directly to the App Store or your Google Play Store and you can just enter Brain Explorer and you can download it. Then we will ask you how old you are and you'll have to consent. That means you agree that you can upload we can use your data for our research purposes and nothing else, just research purposes. If you're under 16, we also ask your parents to say that they're happy. And once you're done, you can go. You can explore, you can play with space cows and pirates and hunt for these gold medals and become a space lord. And with this having said, I'd like to take questions now and see whether you have the questions about the brain, how it develops, or about the app, and so on and so forth. So, yes, that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hauser. That was great. What a fantastic program again. If you want to come out of screen share so you can see us again, have a bit of a conversation, that would be great. I can tell you that after he did the first program with us last year, I downloaded the app instantly and became rather addicted for a short period of time. There are some very fun games, I must admit. But of course, as was mentioned numerous times, again, I think our audience today is almost entirely under 16. If you guys want to get involved, talk to your teacher, talk to your parents. It's a really fun game if you're keen. And if you're not keen, well, then you got a great chance to learn about the brain today in all sorts of cool ways. So we're going to dive into the questions, folks. We've got a bunch of classes with us live. Some of you are going to share in the chat, and I'll relay them to Dr. Hauser. And if you're joining us on YouTube, well, then welcome in. Share your questions in the chat bar there, and we will make it happen. But we're going to kick off today with Miss Gully's class. They're joining us at Elladale Middle School in Virginia. You guys want to unmute your mic, Miss Gully? You are good to go, and I'll bring you in for a quick question. Hi, guys.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hello.
That's a question.
Perfect.
Come over here, check in.
So, what is the most common part of the brain amongst all the animals?
Oh, the most common part of the brain amongst animals, Tobias. So, like, is there something that you can see universally among the animal kingdom?
Ooh, interesting. So, yes. So I think the most common part are the parts I didn't really talk about, which are sitting deep inside the brain. We call that the brain stem. And that really is the thing where the brain originated from. And it's responsible for, the simple things that we need to survive, like breathing, like making your heart beat. This is really, really the essential bit. And even very primitive animals already have that.
I've always loved the idea of the brain as sort of like having layers, like the things that reptiles and fish have, or like the things that are deep inside our brain. And then as we've gotten more and more advanced with some of the things that we can do with our minds, more layers are packed on top of that. So all the parts that we think about, all those parts that you showed, it's such a neat thing. Tobias, we got a great question coming in from Miss Almeida's class. So they're joining us on StreamYard. Their devices aren't working. They just wanted to confirm this is for Canadian kids as well. Like anyone can do this around the world, right?
Yes, exactly. Everyone is welcome. Everyone can do it. The reason why the Canadian map wasn't too green was just because there weren't yet that many people playing, not as many as in the US, but you're the ones to change that and make it very green.
I think this is our big day, Tobias. Miss Hurley's class, if you guys want to come on in, unmute your mics. You're joining us in London, Ontario today. Come on in, guys. Hey.
Have you studied what causes anxiety in the brain?
Ooh, anxiety in the brain.
That is a very good question. So me personally, I'm not really looking in that, but we are very interested in understanding how does mental well-being, anxiety or stress relate to the brain. And that is part of why we do the Brain Explorer app as well. And so many people are interested to understand where anxiety is coming from. And one of the important parts is a small little part in the brain, which is called the amygdala. And that is responsible for when we are fearsome or when we are anxious. That's the area that is always showing up. It's a little thing in the temporal lobe. And we believe that people which have more anxiety might have a very active amygdala. And that might be one of the reasons why we are anxious.
One of the things that's really great for our Canadian classes especially is that mental health was something that was simply not talked about. When I was growing up, when I was the age of the kids in these classes, it was a stigma. No one talked about having anxiety, no one talked about these fears. And now you guys are growing up in a world where it's not entirely perfect yet, but so many people are willing to talk about these things, have these conversations. There's investment in this sort of research and interest. And so it's a really interesting time to be a person who might be anxious, because there's a lot of work being done to make sure that you guys can live, as happy and healthy lives as possible. And that's a really, really important thing. So again, great for our kids today. Let's head to Eden Prairie, joining us with Miss Oak's class. If you guys want to come on in.
How are you able to learn about the brain by other people playing games? Like, how are you able to find their reactions or something?
Yeah.
Very good question. Thank you for that one. As if I had instructed you to ask this. So obviously we can't scan your brain whilst you're playing the games, but we know we have used the same games in the scanner, so we do know when your brain is lighting up. So for example, if you get many points suddenly, then certain areas of the brain are lighting up. And so we can see in the behavior, how do you react, how do you change your reactions, how do you change your decisions based on this feedback. And so we can understand what is the likely mechanism, what is the brain likely to be doing whilst you are playing this game. So this is what we are doing. We don't have a camera that looks inside the brain, but we know from our laboratory experiments using these MRIs what is going on, and we can then what we call extrapolate or understand what is going on when you play these games on the smartphone.
Yeah, it's very, very cool stuff. You sort of see this in action if you play the game. Some of the students that might have this app already, maybe they looked up this program in advance, they'll know what this is like. Having played it myself, you get a sense of it much more readily once you've actually played it than just even hearing about it, which is very cool. Miss Robinson's class, you joined us a couple seconds after we got underway. Well, welcome in Petawawa. If you want to unmute your mic, you are good to go for a question. Hey, guys.
Hi. Is there a part of your body that your brain can't control?
Ooh, a part of the body that the brain can't control. That is a good question. I am not entirely sure, but what I do know is that your guts are very much independent. So actually, we have a lot of brain cells here in the brain, but we also have the second most the second most amount of brain cells are in your guts. So what your guts are doing, what your intestinal system is doing, is very much independent. So it takes a life on its own. So that's why sometimes we can't really control what our bowels are doing.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's never been mentioned in one of our broadcasts before. And to that, so you can actually, again, this is not meant to be a scary thing for classes or anyone else, but it is, your guts can actually have the brain cells in them stop to function. Like your body, the rest of you can be fine, but your guts can sort of have like a brain collapse, which is really, really interesting in a unique way. And we've had octopus programs on before, and I think some of our students might know famously the octopus have brain cells in each of their arms. Their arms act somewhat independently of the main neural network, their main brain, which is very cool. So neat question, guys. All right, Miss Arlene's class, they're joining us in Toronto, grade 7/8 today, and they've been debating and discussing in their classes about video games, releasing stress and increasing imagination. I think that's a fascinating duo of things. Can this be explained via the research? So if you're playing games, do you find that these two things are backed up by research, or what do we know?
I don't actually know that there's that much research on how games influence the brain. I think what is known, so I'm not sure about the imagination. I guess it depends on what kind of games. If you play video games, then they're often quite guided in terms of what you do. So maybe that doesn't really foster imagination. What is known is that these games really make you quicker in terms of your reaction times. So good game players are actually, they can react to other games much quicker. And if you have to do like a very boring task where you have to press a button as soon as you see something flashing up, they are much better at it. So there are some advantages in terms of being a good game player and using video games.
See, that was the thing I told myself when I played Halo and Call of Duty for so many years, that my reaction time was so much better. Tobias, we're getting through these really fast, so I'm going to go back to our classes for another round of questions. Miss Gully's class, if you guys want to kick us off and come back in, you are good to go. Just unmute that mic. In fact, everyone can unmute your mic. You're only audible when I bring you into the broadcast, so make sure you do that. It'll make it easier. Hey, Miss Gully.
Hello again. Oh, what happens to your brain when you have a concussion?
Yeah, concussion.
Well, it is being shaken badly. So what happens to so you have to think about where the brain is. So the brain is sitting obviously in your skull. And not only is the brain made out of water, but around it is kind of a bag of water. And so what happens if you shake this too much, then the brain inside the water will shake back and forth as well. And the problem is that if it hits either the front or the back, then that damages these neurons, these brain cells. So what happens with the concussion is your brain is being shaken back and forth, and by bumping into the front and in the end and into the back, that causes some of the damage in the brain, and that's where the concussion comes from.
I want to note too, and I said at the beginning of this broadcast, if anyone wants to watch this program again, it will be up on our YouTube channel indefinitely. Last week, we actually had a program all on concussions, our first one ever. So if you want to check out the Steam sisters, two amazing researchers here in Toronto, where I am, check out their concussion programs. Really, really neat stuff as a nice follow-up to today's talk. Ms. Hurley's class, come on in. Take us away.
What is the most important part in your brain?
That if you ask 10 different brain scientists, they will all tell you a different area because everyone has their favorite region. I think the most important part is probably the one that keeps you alive, to just speak very simply. So we had this question before, what is the area that most animals have in common? So it's probably this brainstem, because if that is not around, you're unable to breathe, you're unable to make your heart beat, so you will die very quickly. But then you can speculate which is the coolest brain part, which I personally think it's this prefrontal cortex, this big thing in front, which allows us to let us think and make plans and all of that crazy stuff that we are doing with our fantastic organs. So my favorite area, definitely a prefrontal cortex.
See, the good thing about a question like that is you're right. Everyone would give a different answer, but you're the one on camera today, so you get to pick whatever you want. That exists in the record forever. So let's put it this way. We wouldn't be having this conversation today about the work that you're doing, and we wouldn't be able to use this video broadcast if it weren't for our prefrontal cortex, which is pretty cool. So
exactly.
Let's head back to Minnesota. Come on back out to Minnesota. Come on back in.
My question is, how long does it take for information or emotions to get to the brain?
Ooh, that is a good one. It is extremely fast. So we can look at, so what we usually do to measure how quick information is hitting the brain is we usually sit people in front of a screen like you are, and we flash little flashes of light, and then we measure the brain reaction, see how long does it take for the brain to react. And usually we actually see first reactions after something like 50 milliseconds. Now, what is this? This is 1/20th of a second. So if you think 1 Mississippi, that's 20 times the times it takes from a light flash entering your eye to hitting your brain. So it's extremely fast. And then it goes through the brain and it processes and it ends up at the prefrontal cortex after something like 100, 200 milliseconds. So maybe a 10th of a second or a 5th of a second. So the brain is extremely fast and has like these really fast projections. And that's also where the insulation really matters that I've been talking about.
One of my favorite things that I ever learned about the brain was the idea that if you do something consciously, like if I want to pick up this glass, my brain's like, okay, pick up the glass, I reach and grab it. but you also have these things where like you burn your finger on a stove and it's before the brain really even processes it, your body knows to move your hand out of it, which is a testament to that sort of speed. It's very, very cool stuff.
Yes, there are some highways going through which we have very little control over. When you see a snake, probably you're even faster than other things.
See, I must say, other people see the snake and they jump away. I see the snake and I'm like, oh my God, snake! And I go, I love them. Time flies and you're having fun. We're going to take one more question from our classes and make sure they have the resources to keep the learning going when they're done. So Miss Robinson's class, if you guys want to come back in, you're good to go.
Listen up. What part of the brain controls your attention span, and why has people's attention span gotten shorter in recent years?
Interesting.
Ooh, good one. So attention is very important, as you probably know. And we know that many people and children are struggling with it. And we know, for example, you probably have heard of ADHD, this attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where kids often struggle with attention. And that's part of what we are actually interested in and what we are studying in the lab. And one of the key areas that we see is very important is a small area here in the prefrontal cortex, again, my favorite area, which very much controls our attention span and how long we can be focused, even on not so interesting things. So this is very much the prefrontal's work. And for example, our attention gets better as we grow older. And that's also because your prefrontal cortex is more mature and is bigger and works more efficiently. And that's also a driving factor of why some people are better in their attention and others are not.
So one of our goals at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants is to increase all your attention spans by, instead of having a textbook lesson, bringing in cool scientists like Dr. Hauser to talk about the work that they're doing. And so I hope you guys enjoyed all this as much as I did. I want to highlight your website. If people want to learn more about the work that your lab is doing, super cool stuff, devcompc.org. And of course, our main takeaway at the end of the presentation, brainexplorer.net. So if you guys want to check it out, learn about the app, take part, download it yourselves, it's really, really cool stuff, and I encourage you to do so personally. I had a lot of fun with it. I think you guys might too. And Tobias, is there a last message for all our classes today about the brain? How should we leave our kids today? What should they go explore?
Well, just remember you have a fantastic organ in here, and look after it and train it well and be careful with it, because you need it for the rest of your life, and it's a fantastic thing.
Fantastic. No better message than that. And as you know from your first program with us, what we do to end the broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our teacher friends to say a big thank you and farewell. So Miss Gully, Miss Hurley, Miss Oakes, Miss Robinson, unmute your mics. Come on and down and do that, and I'll bring you all in to say a big thank you and goodbye. Thank you guys all so much.